I never thought I'd be thrown out of my own daughter's wedding. Not escorted politely. Not asked to step outside for a quiet talk. Thrown out like I was something that didn't belong in the room anymore. And the strangest part? It wasn't because I yelled. It wasn't because I drank too much. It wasn't because I caused a scene. It was because I embarrassed her. 3 days later, she called me. Not to apologize, not to explain, but to demand my land. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. What she didn't know was that the land was already gone. And by the time her new family realized what I'd done with it, federal agents were already paying attention. My name is Caleb Hartman. I'm 71 years old, and for nearly 5 decades, I poured foundations for other people's dreams. Homes, medical offices, strip malls, warehouses, anything that needed to stand straight and stay standing, that was my work. I started with nothing but a borrowed truck, hands cracked raw by winter cement, and a father who taught me that if you shake a man's hand, you'd better mean it. I built my company slowly, deliberately, one permit at a time, one slab at a time, until I owned just over 48 acres of land on the edge of our county. Land appraised at a little over $7 million. Land my wife, Eleanor, used to say wasn't really about money at all. You're not collecting dirt, she'd tell me. You're collecting time. You're collecting choices. She was right. She usually was. Eleanor passed 5 years ago, and the house has been too quiet ever since. 46 years of marriage doesn't fade just because the calendar keeps moving. I still pour my morning coffee in her chipped blue mug. Still catch myself turning to comment on the news before remembering there's no one sitting at the table anymore. Our daughter, Madeline, calls once every couple of weeks. Polite, efficient, like a scheduled obligation. She married Lucas Whitmore last spring. Lucas is everything I am not. He's 38, polished, born into a family that doesn't build things, they own things. His father runs a regional consulting firm that advises developers, zoning boards, and investment partnerships. Lucas himself wears watches that cost more than my first pickup and talks about land the way most people talk about chess pieces. The wedding was held at Cedar Ridge Pavilion, a place so manicured it didn't feel real. Imported flowers, valets, ice sculptures. Madeline planned it for nearly 2 years. Cost just under $112,000. I know because she told me twice, as if the number itself was proof of success. The trouble started before the ceremony even began. She found me in the dressing area, standing near the coat rack, smoothing the sleeves of my navy suit. The same suit I'd worn to Eleanor's funeral. The same one I'd saved for her because it mattered. Madeline looked me up and down, lips pressed thin. "Dad, you're wearing that." "It's clean," I said. "Fits well enough." She lowered her voice. "Lucas's family will be here any minute. So, they're used to a certain standard." I glanced down at myself. The suit wasn't fancy. Off the rack. Tailored once, years ago. But it carried memories heavier than silk. "It was good enough for your mother," I said quietly. Her face changed. Not softened. Hardened. "That was different," she replied. "This is my wedding." The ceremony itself went fine. Madeline looked beautiful. Lucas smiled like a man who knew he'd won something valuable. I clapped when everyone else clapped. I cried once, quietly, when Eleanor's seat stayed empty. At the reception, I found my name card at table 11. Not the family table. I didn't say anything. I never do. Across the room, Lucas's father was holding court. I could hear him even over the string quartet, talking about growth corridors, opportunity zones, strategic acquisitions. The kind of conversation where nobody listens, they just wait their turn to sound important. Lucas spotted me and raised his glass. "Caleb here owns some remarkable acreage just south of the river," he announced to the table. "Prime land. A real holdout." The word holdout landed wrong. I met his eyes. "Not for sale." The table went quiet. His father leaned forward, smiling the way men smile when they think they're being generous. "Everything's for sale," he said, "at the right number." "Then you're talking to the wrong man," I replied. That's when Madeline appeared beside me. "Dad," she said sharply, "can we talk?" She didn't wait for an answer. Outside, under the glow of decorative lanterns, she let it spill. You humiliated me, she said, in front of his family. I answered a question. You were rude. Lucas's father was being respectful. Respect doesn't start with counting other people's property. She folded her arms. Do you have any idea what they think of you now? I looked at my daughter, my only child, in her white dress, jaw tight, eyes sharp. What do you think of me right now? Her answer came fast. You're embarrassing. The word hit harder than I expected. You cling to that land like it's a personality, she continued. Developers are offering insane money for properties like yours. Lucas says you could sell and live comfortably for the rest of your life. Lucas says a lot of things. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Please, just go home. So I did. I drove my old truck past spotless lawns and streetlights that never flicker, thinking about foundations, how the strongest ones are invisible, and how the weakest ones crack when you build too much on them. 3 days later, Madeline called about the land. Madeline's voice sounded different on the phone. Not angry, not embarrassed. Careful, Dad, she said. We need to talk about your future. I was standing in the kitchen, holding Eleanor's blue mug, watching steam curl toward the ceiling like it was trying to remember where it came from. My future's doing just fine, I said. No, it's not, she replied. You're 71. You're alone in a house meant for 4 people. You're sitting on land worth over $7 million, collecting Social Security like it's a pension plan. It doesn't make sense. There it was. $7 million. Lucas had done his homework. Your mother and I built this place ourselves, I said. Every beam, every pour, every late night after you went to bed. Mom's gone, Madeline said. Too quickly. And I'm married now. You can't live in the past forever. Live in the past. As if loving your wife and honoring the life you built together was some kind of personal failure. She continued, warming to her script. Lucas has connections with Northline Development Group. They're offering $8,400,000 for your property. Cash. No contingencies. Northline. I'd heard the name floating around town lately. Permits sailing through. Council meetings where citizens got timed with stopwatches and developers spoke uninterrupted. That's a lot of money, I said. It's life-changing, she replied. You could move into a luxury condo. Travel. Actually enjoy retirement instead of fixing gutters and talking to ghosts. I closed my eyes at that. Who says I want to travel? You always say you don't like change. I like stability, I said. There's a difference. She sighed. Northline wants to build something transformative. Entertainment district. Resort infrastructure. Jobs. You'd be helping the community. I stared out the window at the tree Eleanor planted the year Madeline was born. Tell me something, I said. When you were little, what did you want to be? What does that have to do with anything? Humor me. A pause. A teacher. And why didn't you? She hesitated. Because teaching doesn't pay enough. For the life you wanted, I said. Or the life Lucas wanted. Silence stretched. Lucas is coming by tonight, she said finally. We're going to talk this through properly. There's nothing to talk through. Yes, there is. He already has preliminary paperwork drawn up. Paperwork. They hadn't even asked if I was interested. That evening, Lucas arrived precisely on time. Not early, not late. Precision was his personality. He wore a charcoal suit and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Caleb, he said, extending his hand. I hope we can find a solution that benefits everyone. We sat in the living room, the same room where Eleanor read bedtime stories, where Madeline learned to walk, where I'd planned to finish my days. Lucas spread documents across the coffee table like a man claiming territory. Northline has big plans, he said. Resort complex, conference center, possibly gaming, depending on zoning. Economic impact studies project thousands of permanent jobs. And the families who live nearby. I asked, traffic, noise, water use. Progress requires trade-offs, Lucas replied smoothly. But you'll be compensated more than fairly. He slid a page toward me. $8,400,000. 35% above market value. You need my land, I said. We recognize its strategic importance, he answered, tone cooling. But timelines don't wait forever. Madeline leaned forward. Dad, Lucas's family understands how approvals work. Zoning, permits, They can navigate all of it. Connections. That word again. I need time, I said. Lucas's smile thinned. Of course. But understand, development can happen with or without your cooperation. Access roads can be rerouted. Utilities reprioritized. Life can become inconvenient. A threat wrapped in courtesy. After they left, I sat alone, thinking about how quickly dignity becomes an obstacle when money's involved. Lucas had assumed I was just another aging landowner clinging to sentiment. He was wrong. The next morning, I drove to see Arthur Bell, my attorney for over 25 years. He read the documents carefully, glasses sliding down his nose. "This is aggressive," he said finally. "Waiver of environmental studies. Inspection periods. That's unusual." Meaning, either they're reckless, Arthur said, or they already know what's under the ground. That afternoon, I went to the county records office. Not as a builder, as a citizen. The clerk, Helen Marsh, looked up and smiled sadly. "You're not the first this week asking about Northline." "Who else?" I asked. She hesitated. "Someone federal." That word settled heavy in my chest. That night, I made 2 calls. First to Arthur. "I want to donate the land." Silence. "To who?" he finally asked. "The school district." "Caleb," he said carefully, "that's over $7 million. It's land," I replied, "and land should outlive greed." The second call was to Helen. "You mentioned someone federal." She lowered her voice. "They left a card. When she texted me a photo of it, I didn't sleep. The seal on the card didn't lie." By the time Madeline called the next day, impatient for an answer, the direction of my life had already shifted. "They'll have their answer soon," I told her. She sounded relieved. She had no idea what that answer would cost her. I didn't tell Madeline what I was doing. Not because I was hiding anything, but because once you start explaining yourself to people who've already decided you're wrong, you've surrendered something important. Instead, I drove downtown the next morning, parked 2 blocks from the courthouse, and walked in like I'd done 100 times before, except this time I wasn't pulling permits or arguing square footage. This time, I was looking for patterns. The county records office smells the same no matter the decade. Paper, dust, coffee that's been reheated too many times. Helen Marsh waved me over with a tired smile. "You back already?" she asked. "I want to see everything tied to Northline Development Group," I said. "Permits, zoning variances, environmental waivers. All of it." She raised an eyebrow. "That's a tall order." "I've got time." She clicked away at her computer, then disappeared into the back. When she returned, she was carrying a folder thick enough to strain her wrist. "They've been busy," she said quietly. "Too busy." I flipped through approvals stamped faster than concrete cures. Rezoning applications approved before public comment periods closed. Environmental impact statements waived on projects that should have triggered state oversight. "How does this happen?" I asked. Helen leaned closer. "Officially, Planning Commission recommendations. City Council votes. Unofficially," she glanced around the room, then whispered, "things get decided before meetings happen." I noticed a name repeating in the margins. Gregory Pike, listed as a consultant. Advisory capacity. No defined scope. "Who's Pike?" I asked. Helen's mouth tightened. "County executive's brother-in-law." That was enough. That afternoon, I met Arthur Bell again. "These approvals," I said, laying copies across his desk. "They don't pass the smell test." He studied them carefully, then nodded. "They smell like coordination. And Northline needs my land to complete their footprint." Arthur leaned back. "Which makes you leverage or an obstacle?" "Both," he said. That night, Helen called me at home. "I shouldn't do this," she said, "but I like your wife, and I don't like what's been happening lately." She told me about a man who'd come in earlier that week, asked the same questions, showed credentials. Federal. Yes. The next morning, I met Agent Rebecca Sloan at a roadside diner 20 miles outside town. No logos, no fanfare, just coffee and eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Hartman," she said, "Northline Development has been on our radar for over a year." "For what?" "Municipal corruption, permit manipulation, money movement that doesn't line up with declared income." I told her about the pressure, the threats dressed as courtesy. She nodded. "Your land completes their project. Without it, the financing collapses." She paused. "We'd like your help." What kind of help? The kind where you keep being yourself, she said. And let us listen. I drove home in silence, thinking about Eleanor's voice, how she used to say that right and wrong don't blur with age. They sharpen. That evening, I went to the school district office. Superintendent Laura Mindel nearly dropped her pen when I told her why I was there. You want to donate how much land? Enough to build something permanent. She stared at me. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. When Madeline called that night, impatient, excited, already spending money she didn't have yet, I listened quietly. I've decided. I told her. I knew you would, she said. She was wrong. I didn't announce the donation right away. Not because I was afraid, but because timing matters when you're dealing with people who think pressure is the same thing as persuasion. Arthur Bell moved quickly, faster than I'd ever seen him work in 25 years. Appraisals expedited, environmental assessments ordered, title searches pulled. Everything clean, everything boring. The kind of boring that stands up in court. The key, Arthur told me, tapping the paperwork with his pen, is an irrevocable charitable trust. Irrevocable, I repeated. Once it's done, he said it's done. No lawsuits from heirs. No clawbacks. No emergency injunctions. The land belongs to the school district, period. I thought about Madeline saying my inheritance. Good, I said. Let's make it permanent. 2 days later, Madeline called. Her tone was bright, almost affectionate. Lucas says Northline's ready to move fast, she said. They're even willing to increase the offer slightly if you sign by Friday. How generous, I replied. Dad, this is your chance. $8,400,000. You'll never have to worry again. I've already stopped worrying. She laughed, not hearing the warning underneath. I'll tell Lucas you're ready. No, I said calmly. You'll tell him I'm giving the land away. The silence on the line was so complete, I checked to see if the call had dropped. Giving it away, she finally repeated. To who? The school district. She laughed then, sharp, disbelieving. That's not funny. It's not a joke. You can't just give away $7 million. I can, I said. And I am. Her voice rose. That's my inheritance. Your inheritance, I replied, was supposed to be values, not acreage. She hung up. Her lawyer called the next morning. Mr. Hartman, he said, introducing himself with a name I didn't bother remembering, we have concerns regarding your mental capacity to make decisions of this magnitude. I almost smiled. They always go there eventually. Arthur handled the rest. Medical records, business history, tax filings, decades of evidence that I was exactly who I'd always been, a man who understood what he was doing. That afternoon, Lucas showed up unannounced. No suit this time. No smile. Caleb, he said, standing in my doorway, you're making a serious mistake. I've made bigger ones, I said, and survived. He stepped inside without being invited. 2 men lingered behind him. Clean shoes. Hard eyes. Northline has commitments, Lucas said. Investors. Contractors. Government partners. Sounds like their problem. It becomes yours when you interfere. There was again pressure, dressed as inevitability. You don't want trouble, he said. I've already lived through losing my wife, I replied. Everything else is negotiable. His jaw tightened. Think about your daughter. I have, I said. Every day. After they left, Agent Sloan called. They're rattled, she said, and rattled people make mistakes. Good, I replied, because the paperwork finishes tomorrow. That night, Madeline came to my house. She stood in the doorway like she didn't recognize it anymore. How could you do this to me? She asked. I didn't do anything to you, I said gently. I did something for this community. She shook her head. You chose strangers over family. No, I said. I chose principle over entitlement. She left without another word. I watched her taillights disappear down the road, knowing some foundations, once cracked, never looked the same again. The first county truck rolled onto my property 2 mornings later. White paint, faded seal on the door. 2 men climbed out wearing reflective vests and expressions that said they'd already decided what they were going to find. I watched from the porch as they walked the perimeter, clipboards in hand, measuring tape, snapping open and closed like it was itching for a reason to exist. One of them knocked. Mr. Hartman, he said, not bothering to look me in the eye. County inspection. Routine compliance review. Routine, I echoed. Yes, sir. Septic system. Well water. Outbuilding permits. Drainage runoff. I nodded. Funny. I've lived here over 3 decades, and nobody's ever been this curious. He smiled thinly. Standards evolve. Behind him, I noticed Madeline's car parked at the end of the driveway. She stepped out, arms folded, Lucas beside her. He didn't approach. Didn't need to. Dad, she said, they just want to make sure everything's in order. What prompted this? I asked. Lucas finally spoke. When property owners resist progress, regulatory bodies tend to look closer. There it was. Not even pretending anymore. The inspectors stayed for hours. Measured everything. Photographed everything. Noted things that had existed for years without issue. Your workshop, one said, tapping his pen. Permit might not meet current zoning. It was approved under prior code, I replied. Codes change. After they left, Agent Sloan called. We recorded everything, she said, especially Lucas's comment. What happens now? Now, she said, they're crossing lines. That evening, Arthur Bell came by with urgency in his voice. They're threatening emergency injunctions, he said. Code violations. Environmental concerns. They're trying to freeze the donation. Can they? Only if they move faster than we do. The next morning, we did exactly that. At precisely when the courthouse doors opened, the final documents were filed. The land was no longer mine. It belonged to the school district. When Lucas found out, he didn't call. He came, this time with lawyers. Agent Sloan met me in a parking lot behind a closed hardware store just after sunset. No sirens, no drama, just a quiet sedan and a woman who spoke carefully because every word mattered now. Once this goes on, she said, holding up a device smaller than a deck of cards, everything changes. I nodded. I understand. This is a one-party consent state, she continued. Completely legal. But make no mistake, once you're wearing this, you're part of an active federal investigation. I thought about Eleanor again, about how she used to say courage wasn't loud. It was steady. I've been steady my whole life, I said. She clipped the device beneath my shirt, checked the signal, then met my eyes. They're going to come back, she said. People like this always do. They believe pressure works if you apply enough of it. She was right. The next morning, Lucas called. His tone was calm again. Friendly. Like nothing unpleasant had happened. Caleb, he said, I think emotions got in the way the other day. Maybe we should sit down and talk this through professionally. Where? I asked. My office. Private. No interruptions. Perfect. His building sat downtown, glass, steel, and imported stone. Everything about it screamed permanence, even though most of it was built on borrowed money. Lucas greeted me like an old friend. I knew you'd come around, he said, gesturing to a leather chair. Your daughter was worried you'd make an irreversible decision. I did, I said, sitting down. That's why I'm here. He smiled, misunderstanding me completely. He launched into diagrams, projections, artist renderings, resorts, entertainment districts, numbers that sounded impressive until you asked who was paying whom. What happens if the school district won't sell? I asked. He leaned back. Public entities can be persuaded. Eminent domain, funding pressure, zoning revisions. And the permits? I asked. He shrugged. We don't have problems with permits. Ow! He hesitated just long enough. Consultants, he said. Relationships. Everyone gets something. That was the crack. When his phone rang and he stepped away, leaving on the desk, I didn't move. The voice on the other end was tight with panic. They're asking questions, it said. Federal questions. Lucas returned pale. We should accelerate, he said. Close everything immediately. Why? I asked. Because delays create exposure. I stood. Lucas, I said quietly, you should have built on solid ground. He didn't understand what I meant. The recorder did. I didn't hear about the arrests from the news. I heard about them from Madeline. She called just after midnight. Her voice wasn't sharp this time. It wasn't controlled. It was unraveling. Dad, she said, they took Lucas. I sat at the kitchen table, Eleanor's mug cooling in my hands. Took him where? I asked, though I already knew. Federal agents came to the house. They had warrants. They said conspiracy, bribery, racketeering. She started crying then. Not the quiet kind. The kind that shakes words loose before they're ready. They said his father's been arrested too, she whispered. And someone from the county office. And a judge. I closed my eyes. The structure had finally collapsed. They have recordings, she continued. Meetings. Phone calls. Conversations. Dad, what did you do? I didn't do anything, I said. Lucas did. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Or maybe that was just memory filling in the gaps. By morning, the story was everywhere. Northline Development Group, executives charged. County officials detained. A municipal judge placed on leave pending investigation. Words like systemic corruption and multi-year conspiracy scrolled across the television like they'd always been waiting. Agent Sloan called just after sunrise. The recordings did more than we expected, she said. You gave us leverage. The rest fell quickly. How many? I asked. So far, 12 arrests, she replied. More coming. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. That afternoon, Lucas's father's attorney called me. Threats dressed as legal language. Accusations wrapped in formal tone. Promises of consequences. I let him speak. Then I hung up. That evening, Madeline came to the house again. She didn't yell this time. She sat at the table, staring at the grain in the wood like it might tell her what to do next. You destroyed our life, she said quietly. No, I replied. I refuse to let criminals use it. She looked up. You chose land over me. I shook my head. I chose honesty over theft. If that feels like abandonment, that's not something I can fix. She left before dark. This time, she didn't look back. The thing nobody tells you about scandals is how quickly they become routine. Not the scandal itself, no, one forgets the first explosion. The sirens. The helicopters beating the air into a dull, relentless thrum. The way your phone buzzes until the battery dies. Messages stacking faster than you can read them. The reporters who learn your street name overnight and pronounce it with artificial familiarity. The breathless anchors saying words like unprecedented and shocking and deeply troubling as if they're tasting them for the first time, rolling them around their mouths before releasing them into the world. That part is unforgettable. It burns itself in. What becomes routine is the living afterward. The gradual realization that nothing ends cleanly. That exposure doesn't arrive with closure attached. That even the most dramatic revelations still have to coexist with trash pickup schedules and school lunches and the quiet obligation of tomorrow morning. One day, your town is normal. The next, it's a headline. And then, almost immediately, people go back to buying groceries and complaining about the weather, except now there's a hairline fracture running through everything. A subtle hesitation in the way people accept official explanations. A pause before nodding along. A new question quietly wedged behind old habits. Trust doesn't shatter all at once. It loosens. The grocery store was the first place I noticed it. Not City Hall. Not the courthouse. The grocery store. The same woman who'd argued with the cashier every week about coupons insisting the expiration date was interpretive, now leaned forward conspiratorially, lowering her voice as if the produce aisle were wired. You hear they're saying it goes higher? She asked no one in particular, fingers resting on a bag of apples she hadn't yet decided to buy. Someone else shook their head. Someone else nodded. The cashier pretended not to listen while listening harder than anyone, eyes flicking up at the sound of certain names. The store hummed the way it always had, but something in the noise had shifted. Conversations didn't stop when someone unfamiliar walked by, simply dropped an octave. Everyone was suddenly fluent in implication. Within a week, the arrests multiplied. They came in clusters, not all at once. Enough to keep the news cycle fed without overwhelming it. Enough to create the sense of inevitability prosecutors like to cultivate slow, steady, inescapable. Each morning brought a new name. Each evening brought another carefully worded statement from a law firm promising cooperation and confidence in the judicial process. The phrases repeated, so often they began to feel meaningless, like elevator music no one remembered choosing. Northline's offices were sealed first. Heavy metal doors locked by federal agents who didn't bother explaining themselves to the small crowd that gathered on the sidewalk. Yellow tape went up, then cameras, then silence. A building designed to project momentum now looked like a mausoleum with better lighting. People lingered longer than necessary. Some took photos. Others just stared, arms crossed, as if waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Bank accounts were frozen. Not just Northlines, but subsidiaries nobody had heard of until reporters started drawing diagrams on television screens boxes connected by arrows, money looping back on itself like a magician's trick explained too late. Construction equipment sat idle behind chain-link fences. Excavators frozen mid-scoop like metal insects caught in amber. Cranes stood motionless against the sky, their long arms pointing nowhere. Rust began creeping in within days, the way neglect always arrives faster than expected. It was strange how quickly a project designed to look inevitable could start to look abandoned. I drove past the site more often than I meant to, drawn by some need to witness the unraveling in real time. Each day it looked less like a future and more like a cautionary diagram. The county executive resigned on a Thursday afternoon. The timing felt intentional late enough to miss the evening news crawl, early enough to frame the narrative before the weekend. He cited health concerns and a desire to avoid distracting from the important work of governance. His letter was 4 paragraphs long and said nothing that couldn't have been copied from a template. 2 planning commissioners followed within 48 hours. One blamed family obligations. The other simply disappeared. No press conference, no statement. Just an empty office and a voicemail box that filled up and stopped accepting messages. People speculated wildly. People always do when information goes missing. A city council member stopped answering calls altogether. People said they'd seen his car in the driveway at night, lights on, television flickering behind closed blinds. But the door never opened. His name remained on agendas for weeks, followed by the same notation, absent. The judge came last. The judge who'd signed more emergency injunctions than anyone could remember. The judge whose rulings always seemed to arrive just in time to smooth the path for projects already halfway built. The judge whose name had once been synonymous with stability. They escorted him out of a private club in handcuffs, cameras flashing so brightly the footage looked almost unreal, like a scene from a movie someone else was living. He blinked against the light, confused more than afraid, as if still waiting for someone to clarify that there'd been a mistake. The word allegedly disappeared from the news coverage faster than anyone expected. By the second week, it was replaced with according to court documents and federal prosecutors allege, which somehow sounded firmer, heavier, more final, less forgiving. Language, I learned, is where certainty quietly moves in. Agent Sloan came by one afternoon, no longer in plain clothes. She stood on my porch in a dark jacket with a badge clipped to her belt, the late sun catching the metal just enough to make it obvious without being flashy. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her, though I suspected it was mostly fatigue. "They're calling it the largest municipal corruption case in the region's history," she said, as if repeating a line she'd already delivered half a dozen times that day. I poured coffee we didn't really need and sat across from her at the kitchen table. The same table where Eleanor used to spread out her drawings, where she'd insist on taping down the corners because she didn't like how the paper curled. The tape dispenser was still in the drawer. I hadn't moved it, and it's still expanding, Sloan added. "How far?" I asked. She took a breath before answering, like someone about to give weather information that might turn into a warning. 3 counties so far, she said. Possibly more. I stared out the window toward the south field. Land that no longer belonged to me. Land that, paradoxically, felt more secure than it ever had. No plans hovering over it now. No glossy renderings. Just dirt and sky and time. What happens to them? I asked. Sentencing guidelines, she said. Decades for some of them. Her tone wasn't triumphant. It was procedural, almost weary. The sound of someone who'd seen enough damage to know victory was a complicated word. I didn't cheer. I thought about how many people had convinced themselves they were untouchable. How many meetings they'd walked into with the quiet certainty that consequences were for other people. How often that certainty had been reinforced by silence, by paperwork, by polite nods. After Sloane left, the house felt too quiet. The silence wasn't new. I'd lived with it since Eleanor died. But this was a different kind, less raw, more settled. Like dust after a collapse, drifting slowly instead of choking you all at once. The school district held a public meeting the following week. Standing room only. Teachers lined the walls, arms crossed, faces tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Parents filled the folding chairs, some with notebooks, others with nothing but folded hands and skepticism they'd earned honestly. Students hovered near the back, curious and restless, sensing that something important was happening even if they couldn't yet name it. People who'd spent years being told there was no money for repairs, no money for programs, no money for growth, no money for art, no money for science labs, no money for roofs that didn't leak when it rained hard enough. Now, there was land, and suddenly, there were funds, two seized assets earmarked for restitution. Words that had once felt abstract, now printed neatly on district letterhead. Superintendent Mendel stood at the podium, her shoulders squared like someone who'd practiced holding herself upright through too many budget cuts and polite disappointments. This gift, she said, nodding in my direction, is not just about acreage. It's about choosing what kind of future we're willing to defend. The applause came in waves, uneven at first, then stronger. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I just sat there and listened. I wished Eleanor were there to hear it. She would have noticed things. I missed the way the art teacher's hand shook when she clapped, or how one of the maintenance workers wiped his eyes and pretended it was allergies. She would have squeezed my arm at just the right moment, grounding me. Madeline didn't attend. She didn't call either. The silence between us settled into something heavier than anger. The kind of distance that forms when two people tell themselves incompatible stories about the same events, and neither is willing to surrender their version. I tried once. I left a voicemail that said nothing important, asked how she was, mentioned the meeting, left space at the end in case she wanted to step into it. She didn't. Time passed anyway. One afternoon, I drove past the empty North Line site. The billboards were gone, taken down quickly and efficiently, as if erasing them might erase the intent behind them. What remained was dirt, tire ruts, and a sense of what almost happened. A field interrupted mid-transformation. I parked on the shoulder and walked closer than I probably should have. No one stopped me. No one cared anymore. I imagined what it would have looked like if I'd said yes. The hotel, rising floor by floor. The private road cutting through the property like a scar. The lights at night, bright enough to drown out the stars Eleanor used to name for me when we couldn't sleep. I imagined explaining that choice to her. Not just the decision, but the reasoning, the compromises, the way I would have justified it by talking about inevitability, about progress, about how one person can't stop a machine once it's moving. I imagined her listening quietly, and then asking one simple question I wouldn't have been able to answer. I went home and poured coffee into her mug. I didn't drink it. I just let it sit there, steaming like a small ritual no one else needed to understand. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because everything was fixed, but because, finally, nothing was chasing me in my dreams. They held the groundbreaking ceremony on a clear Saturday morning, the kind of morning that felt borrowed from another life. The sky was a pale, deliberate blue, scrubbed clean by a rainstorm the night before, the sort that didn't rage so much as insist steady, patient, unignorable. Puddles still clung to the low places in the dirt, catching reflections of folding chairs and trouser legs. Even the air smelled honest. Damp soil, cut grass, coffee drifting from thermoses clutched in cold hands. It felt like the town was holding its breath not in anticipation, but in recalibration. As if something had finally stopped spinning and people were testing whether it was safe to stand still again. There were no balloons, no brass band, no children dressed in matching t-shirts, holding oversized scissors for a photo that would end up framed in someone's office. Just folding chairs pressed into packed dirt, their metal legs sinking unevenly, and a wooden podium that wobbled if you leaned on it too hard. Someone had tried to steady it with a scrap of cardboard folded under one foot, but the wind kept worrying at it like a reminder not to get comfortable. That felt right. A temporary banner had been planted between two steel stakes. White vinyl, blue lettering. No slogan, no mascot yet, no attempt at inspiration beyond the facts. Hartman Ridge Community High School. The words sat there, unadorned and unapologetic, as if daring anyone to argue with them. I had argued, more than once. Quietly at first, during planning meetings where the coffee was always burnt and the agendas always optimistic. Then more firmly when it became clear they weren't going to let it go. It changes the focus, I'd said, palms flat on the conference table, voice measured. It personalizes it, the board chair replied. That's exactly the problem. They listened. I'll give them that. No one dismissed the concern outright. But they'd already decided. They said it wasn't about ego. That was about memory. About anchoring a moment in time when the community chose children over corruption, permanence over profit. They said names mattered. That if you didn't mark the moment, someone else would rewrite it, later smooth the edges, shift the emphasis, turn refusal into inevitability. I wasn't convinced. I still wasn't convinced standing there, watching the banner tug against its zip ties in the breeze. But I'd learned when to stop pushing. Some battles didn't need to be won. They just needed to end. I stood off to the side as people gathered, hands buried in coat pockets, shoes already dusted with dirt. Faces I'd known for decades drifted into view. Neighbors who'd waved from porches through years that now felt compressed. Former clients who avoided my eyes at first, then nodded when they realized avoidance was no longer necessary. Parents with children clinging to their legs or chasing each other between share rose despite half-hearted warnings to behave. Teachers arrived in clusters, the way they always did, drawn together by shared exhaustion. They carried themselves with the quiet endurance of people who had learned to do too much with too little and keep doing it anyway. Some wore district badges. Some didn't bother anymore. It didn't matter. They all belonged here. There was no music, no countdown, no ceremonial soundtrack to cue applause. Just the sound of conversation, gravel crunching underfoot, the distant hum of traffic from the county road. Someone laughed a sharp, surprised sound, like it had escaped before permission could be granted. Someone else hugged a person they hadn't seen since before everything fell apart, holding on a beat too long, as if afraid the other might vanish again. It felt less like a ceremony and more like a reckoning. Superintendent Mendel stepped to the podium when the murmuring thinned. She adjusted the microphone twice before it stayed put, then rested her hands lightly on the edges as if grounding herself. She hadn't rehearsed this the way administrators usually rehearsed. I could tell by the way she inhaled before speaking, not deep enough to steady nerves, just enough to remind herself she was here. This land, she began, her voice carrying without strain, could have become something exclusive, something loud, something profitable for a few. She let the words sit. Not for effect, I realized that almost immediately, but because she was choosing them carefully, weighing what the truth could bear. She didn't name the development. She didn't need to. Everyone there knew what had almost risen on this ground. Glass, steel, gates, a project that would have been praised in regional business journals and quietly resented everywhere else. Instead, she continued, it will become something permanent for everyone. The applause started politely, the way it does when people know applause is expected and are willing to comply. Then it strengthened. Hands came together with intent. People looked at one another while clapping, nodding as if confirming something unspoken. Agreement turned into affirmation. Affirmation into relief. I didn't clap right away. Standing there, I felt the discomfort of being thanked for something that had never felt like generosity. Refusal, maybe stubbornness. A line drawn and held long enough that other people noticed it existed. But generosity implied abundance. What I'd felt during those months had been closer to depletion. People kept glancing toward me anyway, as if proximity might grant context. A few nodded. One man, retired machinist, name I couldn't recall, lifted his hand in a brief salute before sitting down again, the motion efficient, almost military. I wondered what version of the story he carried, whether I was a symbol in it or just a catalyst. Agent Sloan stood near the back, posture straight, hands folded loosely in front of her. She watched the crowd the way some people watch storm fronts, not because they expected disaster, but because they knew how quickly weather could turn. She didn't smile. She never did at events like this. But there was a looseness in her shoulders I hadn't seen before. She found me afterward while volunteers handed out coffee and pastries from folding tables. Someone had brought homemade muffins. Someone else had splurged on name-brand creamers. Small luxuries deployed deliberately. "They're expanding the investigation," she said, like she was commenting on the temperature. "4 states now." I raised an eyebrow. Asset recovery is approaching $200 million. I'll let the number sit between us. It felt unreal. The kind of figure you read in reports, but never quite believe. $200 million siphoned, laundered, disguised as development incentives and consulting fees. All that damage hidden behind smiles, glossy renderings, and press releases full of words like revitalization and growth. Lucas had taken a plea deal. 8 years in federal prison, with cooperation requirements that would keep him talking for the rest of his sentence. I'd seen him at the hearing. He looked smaller, not physically diminished, but compressed, like someone who had spent too long insisting the walls weren't closing in. His father received more. The judge hadn't softened the language. Abuse of office, systemic fraud, betrayal of public trust. Words that carried weight because they were earned. Several county officials would never hold office again. Some would never see freedom outside scheduled recreation hours. Justice, I learned, was rarely dramatic. It arrived in paperwork, sentencing guidelines, quiet removals from positions once treated as permanent. Madeline didn't attend the ceremony. I noticed the absence the way you notice a missing tooth with your tongue instinctively, repeatedly. I hadn't expected her to come. Not really, but some small, unreasonable part of me had hoped. She texted later. "Saw it on the news. The school looks good." The ellipsis did more work than the sentence. I stared at the message for a long time. Drafted responses. Deleted them. Tried again. Finally settled on something simple. "It's for the kids. That's what matters." She didn't respond. That evening, I drove out to Eleanor's grave. The cemetery sat on a low rise outside town, bordered by trees that had outlived most of the names etched into stone. The road there was narrow and familiar, the turns memorized long before grief demanded repetition. I brought fresh flowers, nothing elaborate. She'd never liked elaborate. I sat on the grass the way we used to after long days, shoes off, knees pulled up, letting the quiet settle. "They're building something solid," I told her. Something honest. I imagined her smile, the small one she saved for moments that mattered. The one that didn't need commentary. On the drive home, I passed the land one more time. Survey stakes marked future classrooms. Little flags fluttered where lockers would stand. The ground looked the same as it had that morning, raw, unremarkable. But I could see it now. Hallways, windows, noise, life. I didn't feel like I'd lost anything. I felt like I'd finished something. The chairs were gone by noon. Volunteers folded them down with practiced efficiency, stacking metal frames into the backs of pickup trucks and borrowed vans. The cardboard shim vanished with the podium, its brief service complete. By early afternoon, the land looked almost abandoned again, save for tire tracks and the banner still tethered between its stakes, snapping lightly in the wind like it refused to be forgotten too quickly. I stayed longer than most. Not out of obligation, there was nothing left to organize, but because leaving felt premature, like standing up before the final note of song had fully faded. I walked the perimeter once, hands in my coat pockets, counting steps without meaning to. The soil was still soft from the rain. My shoes came away darker, heavier. A man I didn't recognize lingered near the road, phone pressed to his ear. He nodded at me once, distracted, then turned away. Somewhere behind me, a child asked when the school would be finished. The answer came from a tired parent's mouth. A while yet. The child accepted it without protest. Children were better at waiting when the reason made sense. When the last vehicle pulled away, the quiet changed. It wasn't emptier, just different, less anticipatory, more settled. I stood near where the main entrance would be. Someone had chalked a rough outline on the ground, rectangles and arrows marking imagined walls. The chalk would wash away with the next rain, but the intention wouldn't. That was the part people always underestimated, how stubborn intention could be once it took root. I thought of Eleanor then, not in grief, but in habit. She would have liked the lack of spectacle, would have rolled her eyes at balloons, found the whole thing suspect if it had tried too hard to be celebratory. Let's stand on its own, she used to say. If it's real, it won't need confetti. I drove home with the windows down despite the chill, letting the air sting my face awake. Town passed in familiar fragments. The hardware store with the flickering sign, the diner that had shortened its hours after the scandal broke, the law office now empty, its windows papered over while ownership tangled itself in court. People waved. A few didn't. Both felt appropriate. The following weeks were quieter, but not calmer. Investigations have a way of rippling outward long after the initial splash. Subpoenas bred subpoenas. Names surfaced in places no one had thought to look. Old deals were re-examined with new eyes, their justifications collapsing under scrutiny. Agent Sloan called twice. The first time was procedural updates delivered in her clipped, efficient cadence. The second time, weeks later, felt different. Less official, more reflective. You did something rare, she said. You made it expensive to lie. I didn't do it alone. No, she agreed. But you held the line long enough for others to step up. I thought about that after we hung up, about lines and how invisible they were until someone refused to cross them, about how lonely they felt when you were the only one standing there. Lucas wrote once. The letter came from a federal facility 3 states away. Plain envelope. Careful handwriting. No return flourish. He didn't apologize. Not directly. He explained instead pressures, expectations, the momentum of inherited power. Reading it felt like listening to someone describe a storm from the inside, while insisting they hadn't noticed the clouds gathering. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Some conversations didn't move forward no matter how long you extended them. Madeline remained silent. I saw her once, unexpectedly, in the grocery store parking lot. She stood beside her car, keys in hand, scanning the sky like she'd forgotten something important and was trying to remember where she'd left it. We nodded. Nothing more. That night, I dreamed of the school not finished, not even close. Just framing. Beams rising into nothing, held in place by temporary braces. Wind moved through it freely, unimpeded. In the dream, it didn't feel incomplete. It felt honest. Construction began in earnest by early spring. The sound of machinery replaced birdsong. Trucks arrived at dawn, left at dusk. The land transformed, daily trenches dug, foundations poured, steel skeletons emerging piece by piece. Progress became visible in a way accountability never had. I stopped by sometimes unannounced, watched from a distance, learned the rhythm of it. The foreman recognized me after a while, nodded once, then went back to work. No ceremony, just acknowledgement. One afternoon, a teacher stood beside me new to the district, she said, transferred after her previous school closed. She talked about class sizes, about students who carried more than backpacks into the room each day. She talked until she realized she was talking too much, then laughed, embarrassed. Sorry, she said. It just feels like maybe this time will be different. Maybe, I said, and meant it. The banner came down eventually. Not in a ceremony, just quietly removed when it began to tear along one edge. Someone folded it carefully, set it aside. I never asked where it went. By summer, walls enclosed space. Windows caught sunlight. The outline of hallways became navigable if you knew where to look. Children pressed their faces to the chain-link fence sometimes, speculating loudly about gyms and cafeterias and whether the lockers would be blue or gray. I attended fewer meetings. Let others decide colors, mascots, schedules. My role had ended, whether anyone admitted it or not. Completion wasn't absence. It was release. On the first day teachers were allowed inside, I stayed away. I drove instead to the cemetery, brought flowers again. Saturday. Listened. I think we did enough, I said aloud, unsure who I was convincing. The wind moved through the trees. Leaves whispered. It felt like an answer. Months later, on an ordinary morning, I passed the school without slowing. Students were there now. Buses lined up. Noise spilled out laughter, arguments, the sound of lockers being slammed with unnecessary force. Life unfiltered. The sign out front was permanent now. Letters mounted in steel. No explanation beneath them. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. Some things, once finished, don't require revisiting. They stand on their own, doing the work they were meant to do. And that was enough. 2 years have passed since the groundbreaking. Time has a way of sanding the sharpest edges down to something you can hold without bleeding. Hartman Ridge Community High School opened last fall. 800 students. Science labs that don't leak when it rains. Trade classrooms that smell like sawdust and oil instead of mold. Fields where kids run themselves tired instead of running out of options. I volunteer there twice a week. Nothing official. No title. I just show up and help where I'm useful. Teach a few students how to read a level properly. How to measure twice. How to pour a footing that won't crack the first winter it faces real pressure. Some of them ask me if I regret it. $7 million is a number people can't help imagining in their own pockets. I tell them the truth. I didn't give away $7 million, I say. I traded it. For what? They ask. For nights where I can sleep. For a town that doesn't have to pretend corruption is progress. For kids who won't grow up thinking the only way to win is to cheat someone quieter. That usually ends the conversation. Madeline visits sometimes. Not often. Not comfortably. We talk about the weather. About the school. About neutral things that don't reopen wounds neither of us knows how to close yet. But last month, she stayed a little longer than usual. We sat on the porch as the sun dropped behind the trees Eleanor planted decades ago. I didn't understand what you were protecting, she said finally. I thought you were just holding on. I replied. Just not to what you thought. She nodded. Didn't argue. That felt like something. I still live in the same house. Same creaking steps. Same kitchen table. Eleanor's mug still sits by the sink. Some habits don't fade because they're not habits. They're anchors. From my window, I can see the school lights in the distance some evenings. Bright rectangles against the dark. Proof that something good took root, where something rotten tried to grow. The investigation spread far beyond our county. Over 100 arrests across several states. Nearly $200 million recovered and redirected to communities that needed it long before developers decided they were opportunities. Agent Sloan sent me a note when she retired. Just a card. No badge. No seal. You reminded people that systems only work when someone refuses to look away. That meant more than any headline ever did. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Real foundations don't show off. They don't glitter. They don't demand applause. They sit quietly underground, holding weight most people never think about until they're gone. Some people build wealth to be admired. Some build power to be feared. But the ones who last, they build something others can stand on long after their own hands are gone. If you've ever been pressured to sell your principles for comfort, remember this story. And if you believe integrity is still worth something in a world that keeps trying to discount it, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because somewhere near you, someone is being told to move aside. And sometimes, the strongest thing an ordinary person can do is refuse.